Hi guys, it's Mrs. Schuchart again. We're going to be doing some reading today in our textbook. We're going to be reading in 10.2, and we're going to find out about the kingdom and captivity of the Israelites. So let's open our books and turn to page 334 and see what we're going to learn today. All right, let's begin. Build on what you know. You have learned that the Israelites came back to Canaan from Egypt. When they returned, they fought to regain control of the land and clashed with their neighbors. The Israelites' belief in one God and their religious practices set them apart from the others in the region. They traded with the other groups in Canaan, but they did not adopt their culture or their beliefs. However, sometimes individuals from different groups did mix. One such example is the story of Ruth and Naomi, which we already read at the beginning of this chapter. Saul and David. About 1029 BC, the Israelites faced the Philistines, another people in the area. The Philistines invaded and conquered Israelite territory. The Israelites agreed to unite under one king in order to fight the Philistines. Although many feared that a king in particular, with too much power, a judge named Samuel, shared these concerns, but helped select the first king of the 12 tribes. A new leader. The Israelites chose Saul, a respected military leader, as the first king in 1020 BC. Under Saul, the Israelites fought the Philistines. These battles forced the Philistines to lose their control over the Israelites. After Saul's death, the Israelites looked for a new leader. According to the Bible, Samuel chose a young man named David as the next king. The choice was a wise one. About 1000 BC, David and the Israelites drove out the Philistines. David won control of Jerusalem. Solomon. David established a line of kings. He chose his son Solomon to succeed him. Solomon became the third king of Israel in about 962 BC. Solomon, too, was a strong leader. During Solomon's rule, Israel became a powerful nation. Solomon built on trade ties between Phoenicia and Israel, established by David. Solomon also formed new trade alliances. Solomon oversaw many building projects. His most famous was the Temple of Jerusalem. The temple became the center of religious life for the Israelites. People came there from all parts of the kingdom to say prayers and to leave offerings. Many also came to ask the wise king to settle their disputes. Remember, before they had the king, they relied on the judges to help settle disputes. But now they have a king, and so there's King Saul and King David and King Solomon. Those are the three kings that you're going to need to know. So make sure you remember King Saul, King David, and King Solomon. All right, let's move on to page 337. Faced by a threat of attack, the Israelites tribes formed the kingdom of Israel. When the threat ended, they quarreled and fought. King Solomon died in about 922 BC. When Solomon's son became king, the northern tribes refused to pledge their loyalty until he agreed to lighten their taxes and end the forced labor on building projects. When he refused, the tribes rebelled. Only the tribes of Judah and Benjamin remained loyal. Israel split into two separate kingdoms, the northern part called Israel, and the two tribes in the southern area, which included Jerusalem, called their new nation Judah. The word Judaism and Jews comes from the name of Judah. Two separate kingdoms existed for about 200 years. Throughout this period, Jerusalem remained an important center of worship. The Assyrians and the Babylonians. Remember, guys, we already learned about the Assyrians and the Babylonians, but now we're going to look at it from a religious point of view. Let's see what happens with the Assyrians and the Babylonians. It says on page 337, By 738 BC, both kingdoms faced new threats to their independence from the Assyrians. The Assyrians forced Israel and Judah to pay tribute. Remember, tribute is money paid so they don't kill you. In 722 BC, the Assyrians invaded Israel and conquered it. The kingdom of Israel ended. Around 612 BC, the Assyrian Empire fell to the Babylonians. For many years, King Nebuchadnezzar ruled Babylonia. In 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar captured Jerusalem. When Judah's leaders resisted his rule, the Babylonians destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. They took thousands of Jews back to Babylon as captives. The exile from Judah the exiles, that's the people that they took from Jerusalem to Babylonia. The exiles from Judah spent about 50 years in Babylon. This time is known as the Babylonian captivity. During this period, the Israelites came to be known as the Jews. If you look in your vocabulary, one of the words is the Babylonian captivity, and here on page 338, you can find the definition of it. Okay, let's read on. We're getting close to the end. Let's finish it up. Beliefs during the Babylonian captivity. During their years in Babylon, the Jews struggled to keep their identity. They continued to observe religious laws, celebrate holidays, and worship as they had in Judah. They hoped someday to return to their homeland in Judah and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. The exiles also looked forward to a time when they would have their own king again. Before the exile, the Hebrews leaders were anointed or had special oils poured on their heads when they assumed the office. The Hebrew word Messiah means anointed one, charged with some task of leadership. Throughout the centuries of foreign rule, the people kept hoping for their own king. This was sometimes expressed in a hope for an anointed king, an heir to the throne of David, a Messiah. They were looking for someone to lead them. They were looking for a holy person to come and to lead them out of captivity. During times of trouble, both Judah and the exile, the Jewish people turned to the spiritual leaders called prophets for advice. These men and women were thought to have special abilities to interpret God's word. They warned the people when they strayed from the Jewish code of conduct. They criticized rulers who were not living according to God's laws, and the prophets also comforted the people in times of trouble. The temple was rebuilt in 539 BC. The Persians conquered Babylonia. As you have learned in chapter 4, lesson 3, the Persian king Cyrus the Great set up a policy of, what was it? Tolerance, religious tolerance in his empire. In 538 BC, Cyrus freed the Jews from exile, from captivity, and allowed them to return through their homeland in Judea, or Judah. Soon after most of the exiles returned to Judah, they began rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. I'll get there. The beautiful temple Solomon had built lay in ruins. Grass grew between the crumbling walls. Workers completed the new temple in 515 BC. So important things to remember. 1, King Saul, King David, King Solomon were the first 3 kings of Israel. The next one, after the death of Solomon, the kings of Israel split into 2 smaller kingdoms, Israel on the top and Judah on the bottom. And the last thing that's kind of important to remember from this section is that the Babylonian conquest destroyed the temple of Jerusalem and forced the people of Judah into exile in Babylon, called the Babylonian captivity, which lasted 50 years. All right, so we read through this section. You're going to take your notes and you're going to go through and you're going to fill in your notes first. And then on the other side, on the other page, are the review questions for 10.2. So take some time right now. Look through your notes, fill in what you can of them, and then answer your review questions. I hope you enjoyed my reading, and I look forward to doing it again. See you guys. Bye.